session this afternoon. And I just wanted to start, I know that you've all probably heard a lot of acknowledgements of country today. I've said it so many times, so I can't even say it myself. And often I think about, I worry about acknowledgements becoming tokenistic and a little bit rote. So I did consider, do we need to open every session and immediately have it, me do it, next person do it, and think through, ways to approach that in a much more thoughtful way. And one of the things I wanted to say, I guess, is we obviously acknowledge every time when we are on this campus in Mianjin, in Maiwa, the Jagera and Turrbal people, but we don't often include and extend that acknowledgement to colonised peoples all around the world. And we are going to have some international perspectives today. So I think it's really important to think not just the colonisation, the dispossession, the theft and the genocide that has happened here on this continent, but the fact that it is part of a broader colonial project, a capitalist project that has just extracted so much from so many billions, quite literally billions of people, and cost billions of lives all around the world.
Yeah.
That's why I asked you that. So we are going to go slightly out of order to what's on the program today. Obviously, talking about the social and ecological crisis means we could pretty much start wherever we want. But we do have, unfortunately, two of our presenters had to join us via video. So we're going to start with a presentation on the narrative economics as an approach to the universal basic income from Gudrun Kaufmann. And that is going to be, I think Jen's sorting that out right now because she's magic. We're going to see about 2/3 of that video because it's running a little bit long, so we won't have time to get to questions if we watch the whole thing. So we're going to watch the first 15 minutes. Once we get to that point, we're going to pause it and leave you in suspense, and then you're going to go online later and watch the rest of it. So Jen, are you ready? We're going to hand over now to Gudrun and hopefully it all works smoothly, and then I'll be back.
Good afternoon. I'm excited to present at this year's Yen conference. My name is Gudrun Kaufmann, and the title of the presentation is Narrative Economics as an Approach to Universal Basic Income. This is the outline. My first question, then an overview of the current research on narrative economics, followed by some definitions. After that, I will show some examples of basic income seen in the narrative. And finally, I will present some ideas for achieving more acceptance of basic income through the use of narratives. Here are my questions. If you look at new publications, there's a growing empirical evidence that recently a narrative turn takes place in economics. The paradigm shift is based on the view that narratives play a fundamental role for the economy. But are there benefits of the new research field for UBI? That's my question. And I'm particularly interested in the question of how acceptance for the idea of basic income can be increased and what role narratives could play. I'm therefore trying to look at current developments within the field of economics, examining the potential of narrative economics. The basic idea of narrative economics, as I understand it, is the assumption that narratives have a significant influence on the behavior of economic actors. They play a central role in the decision-making, providing important explanations for the fundamental understanding of economy. At the same time, it's interesting in my eyes that the basic income itself is increasingly referred to as a narrative. So far, however, this occurs largely outside of the research field of narrative economics, mostly among advocates, but also among academics from other disciplines, for instance, sociology and political science. But there have been only few contributions to UBI from narrative economist side so far. With this in mind, I would like to understand where the basic income debate currently stands and what possible perspectives for the future are. Which kind of narratives can we use for implementing basic income? Here you can see a list of some relevant literature. There are several conceptions and approaches rather than one definition. At this point, it should be noted that in other academic disciplines, there were a much earlier interest in narratives, with the first beginning as early as the 1960s, for example, in anthropology, in sociology, and of course in literature studies, where there has been talk of a narrative turn for much longer. But in the wake of the financial crisis in 1928, a lot of publications emphasized the importance of popular stories and other previously marginalized aspects of economic life in order to show a way forward for economics with less blind spots. There seems to be such a shift toward narratives in economics at the moment. The increasing frequency of the curve is evident. In the following, I will discuss some of these books, edited volumes, and papers a little bit closer. Let's start from behind with the paper of Michael Roos and Matthias Recchius. Michael Roos and Matthias Recchius are two German economists and published last year a paper called Narrative in Economics. They present their own definition as following. A narrative is economically relevant if it is a sense-making story that emerges in a social context and suggests action to a social group. Both have presented a very good overview of a new research field. I'm very grateful for this. According to Roos and Recchius, there are at least 5 different research fields. The first field relates to the political economy, to economic history, and to development economics. The second field is macroeconomics. It relates to decision-making and behavior on a broad scale, including self-fulfilling expectations, such as bank runs, real estate bubbles, and text mining, which all are influenced by narratives. The third field is applied econometrics, perhaps surprising. The next field includes research of sustainability, transition, and future thinking, where narratives seem obviously appropriate as actively created constructs which serve a specific political purpose. Research then tends often to focus on both the consequences of certain narratives for society on the one hand, and also on the roots and terms of the initial formation, including scenario development and modeling narratives of change. Nevertheless, this field often involves normative judgments, but narratives can, however, express these normative evaluations in a clear manner. This could be an advantage over traditional approaches. Finally, Roos and Recchius show that also the field of microeconomics and decision theory contain narratives, for example, as an alternative way in the tradition of the framing effects of behavioral economics. There's no time to go deeper now, and I guess we are more interested in basic income and how these approaches can be combined. But before this, I will present some more definitions and short answers to the question what narrative economics is. Jens Beckert and Richard Bronk entitled the edited volume Uncertain Futures, Imaginaries, Narratives and Calculations in the Economy, which was published in 2018. In the introduction, both show how in conditions of uncertainty, economic actors combine calculation with imaginations and narratives to form fictional expectations that coordinate action and provide the confidence to act. They define a narrative as a story, model, fictional expectation, or guiding belief with a focus on an uncertain future. From their point of view, also rational calculation devices can have a narrative structure, can be embedded in narrative. In general, Beckett and Bronk call imaging areas and narratives tools for coping with uncertainty. Of course, uncertain futures are nothing new for economists. Frank Knight made a famous distinction about 100 years ago between measurable risk and radical uncertainty, where probabilities cannot be calculated. So, what's new here? Good question. Beckett and Bronk argued that future has changed under the conditions of late modern capitalism. According to Beckett and Bronk, the future is nowadays open to widespread innovation and complex interdependencies. The understanding of decision-making requires new approaches, leading to shared narratives and fictional expectations. The past is no longer a reliable guide to uncertain futures, they say. My next case is Robert Shiller. He is a very well-known American economist and Nobel laureate who published his book Narrative Economics in 2019. His book is considered by many to be the foundation of narrative economics, although there had been other publication on narrative economics before that, which Shiller hardly mentioned. Similar to Beckett and Bronk, Shiller defines a narrative as a justificatory or explanatory story or representation, which includes also theories, models, and so on. The crucial characteristic, according to Shiller, is that narratives are contagious, that they are going viral. Striking about Shiller are the mostly very negative connotations, fitting well to the viral metaphor. As narratives from Schiller's point of view often lead to crises, crashes, or bubbles, narrative economists have to be like epidemiologists. They should neutralize irrational, false, and misleading narratives through analysis of the mechanisms of action. According to Shiller, economists could improve their forecast, influence political decisions, create even counter-narratives that re-establish rational economic behavior. Remarkable is that Shiller mentions the basic income as only connected to an automation narrative about labor-saving machines. He wants to show that the idea of universal basic income is an old but nevertheless misleading narrative. Basic income is seen as part of a larger, deep-rooted panic narrative about automation and nowadays artificial intelligences, with the machine replacing jobs. Shiller devotes only 1.5 pages in his book to basic income, but he mentions following history of the idea. Starting with Henry George, who published his book Progress and Poverty in Times of Crisis during an economic depression in the year 1870. His solution was to propose a single tax on land. According to Shiller, George's proposal to distribute part of the tax revenues as a public benefit is very similar to the basic income idea. Shiller then mentions Charles Whiting Baker's book, Pathways Back to Prosperity, where Baker advocated something like an universal basic income as reaction to a long-term problem of unemployment. Next, he refers to Lady Judith Rees Williams' proposal, something to look forward to, a suggestion for a new social contract, which was an alternative to the Babbage plan. Even Yen is mentioned by Shiller shortly in one sentence as an advocacy book. To summarize Schiller's view on basic income, he considers basic income only as part of a panic narrative, which for him almost only negative effects on the economy. His book, and as well as several recent interviews about the COVID-19 crisis, where he identifies BBI with helicopter money, shows that he is quite skeptical about BBI. This is part 4 now, where basic income itself is seen as a narrative. There are several academics talking about basic income as a narrative, and in my paper I will go into more detail, but now it's not enough time, so I will only mention a few examples here. First, the highly esteemed Louise Haag. I have taken note of 2 of her books, the Philosophy and Political Economy of Basic Income, revisited from 2019, and From Freedom to Finance, how development conditions and paradigm frame the basic income debate from the last year. There, Haag claims to draw attention to narrative tendencies and risks as they relate to the present moment of rapid public exposure to basic income debates, and explore how a wider contextual analysis can help us to identify trends and navigate contemporary debates. Haag also points out that visions of economic governance have deep historical roots in basic income narrative, raising new issues and begging a need to conceptualize the practical role of basic income in broader terms. Also, very important in my eyes is the question Louise Haag asked with reference to Karl Polanyi, if basic income is an improvement, can it also be a double movement, a basis for cementing new forms of exclusion, as Polanyi already argued in his famous book about the Great Transformation? A very good question. By the way, a quite similar book title is used by Gustav Schwab, who is suspected of misusing basic income as on a global scale as an instrument of surveillance and oppression. Now I want to speak about basic income as global story, about sustainability as already suggested by Kristin in 2008 in his book, A Global Ecological Argument for Basic Income. This view is widespread now. As Kristin argued, the idea of ecological sustainability could really be the key to a globally understandable narrative. We distinguish 4 levels of argumentation on basic income. First, as a global story about sustainability and the good life for all. Second, as a grand story about the development of democracy, civil rights, and the welfare state. Third, as a few small stories about, for example, unemployment and gender equality. Fourth, as a series of technical stories about simplifying the system of transfer payments, and so on. Kristin shows in his book Optimism that these narratives can reinforce each other, and that the most comprehensive one, the pursuit of global sustainability and justice, provides a necessary framework for the smaller and more technical stories. Now I will come to some conclusions and open questions for further research. I would like to say that I do not claim to have yet a well-founded view of all the questions raised up to here, but I hope, however, that I will provide some starting points for further basic income research from the new perspective of narrative economics. So the main question again is, how is it possible to combine the research approach of narrative economics with the core results of UBI research? That's still a question for me. I try conclusions from two different perspectives. First, from an ontological perspective. As narratives are mostly linked to future, basic income as narrative could help to visualize future possibilities. Economic narratives play an important role for decision-making and also action leading towards these future possibilities. There are several competing narratives. So we should not think that there's only one UBI narrative that fits for all. Now, from a more methodological perspective, and with reference to the 5 fields of narrative economics proposed by Rose and Beckius in the beginning, how can basic income be applied to those 5 areas? There is already quite a lot of basic income research related to all these different fields. I can also imagine applications, for example, experimental economics in the design of lab experiments and surveys. From my point of view, the task is now to make the research approach more visible, to reframe and communicate the results, and to develop, for example, new and more dynamic microsimulations of basic income. And I really like the idea of basic income seen as a case simulation with reference to reality, but only at the starting point of a counterfactual what-if scenario that is assumed to say something possible true about future realities. I'm almost at the end of my presentation. Only 2 more slides now. The climate change is currently and in fact the greatest threat, but communicated mostly together with the degrowth in a negative way. And the question of sharing the social burden is often still considered as an unsolved problem. Basic income and measures of climate protection could hopefully reinforce each other, if tied together with powerful narratives. Considering this, the combination of UBI and ecological sustainability seems maybe double appropriate. Only a very big picture might help us solving problems such as climate change and social justice. And narratives may help us to draw such a big picture. Some last examples here. UBI is a future narrative in times of uncertainty and meaningful crisis. As example, when basic income is not a panacea, it is important to combine it with other narratives. And if you look at UBI as a counter future narrative to existing hegemonic narratives, UBI could be combined with the narrative of a new social contract. Or just imagine Bien taking the road to basic income, like the more tolerant society. Why not? It's really time to come to the end, but to address these questions systematically. I'm really looking forward to a workshop on this topic next year. Freiburg, the Freiburg Institute for Basic Income Studies, will be organizing a workshop on basic income and future narratives. I decide now to leave the closing words to a pioneer of narrative economics, to Gudrun McCloskey. This is a serious advice. Economists should become aware of their own science fiction, as Gudrun McCloskey puts it in her book 30 years ago. Plainly and routinely, 90% of what economists do is storytelling. Yet even the 10% in the part more obviously dominated by models and metaphors, the economists tell stories. Economists tell a lot of stories and must practice therefore the art of storytelling, which is also true for myself and corresponds to my hope as a means of knowledge and a guide to action. Thank you very much for listening.
So the next presentation that we're going to have is from Cool Earth, and it's kind of basic income for Indigenous peoples and local communities to save the rainforest and help fight the climate crisis, which is a perfect lead into Frederic's talk, which we'll be hearing before we go into conversation, which is UBI could be a tool to facilitate decolonization in New Caledonia. Sorry, I can't talk today. Done too much of it.
You've done lots of talking.
Yes, that's right. I've done a lot of talking. Okay, so if we're ready to go, folks, we can get the Cool Earth video going.
Good afternoon. I'm Martin Simonneau. I'm in charge of the cash programs of the UK-based climate charity Cool Earth. Firstly, I'd like to apologise for the presentation format. We were meant to be in the room with you all. My colleagues from Papua New Guinea, Ricky and Clifford, were going to travel to Australia, but sadly Immigration Services got the better of us, which is a real shame. So they're also sitting behind a screen like me, hopefully answering the questions you might have at the end of this session in a chat box. But we're incredibly grateful to the organisers of the Congress for allowing us to remain as presenters, because we really want to introduce ourselves, but we're also absolutely delighted to exchange with you all and learn from you especially. In fact, what the network has been producing since its creation, what it's been promoting, what it's been sharing, has been hugely inspirational for us at Cool Earth. That's why today I want to talk to you about why I believe that a basic income to people who live in the rainforest is key to fighting the climate crisis, which I believe is an idea, or let's call it a research project, that hasn't been very well studied up until now. And then please correct me if I'm wrong, probably in the chat box. Cool Earth exists. I'm going to talk to you about Cool Earth a little bit. Cool Earth exists because we think it's wrong that less than 1% of the $600 billion invested to fight the climate crisis, that less than 1% of that trickles down to Indigenous peoples and local communities. And what's even more incredible, and I'm sure you're all well aware of this, is that when it does trickle down, they're often told what to do by people who live thousands of miles away from the rainforest. And funnily enough, for 50 years now, Save the Rainforest has been a sort of rallying cry for most environmental movements in the West. But there's been very little success stories. In fact, it seems that in this time, conservation efforts have sort of failed spectacularly for a number of quite somber reasons, to be perfectly honest. Think about the creation of national parks for biodiversity protection, often at the expense of Indigenous peoples, especially in Africa. It's been reported quite a lot in the DRC, in Uganda, in Kenya, and in plenty more countries. Think about the arbitrary conditionality behind payment for ecosystem services, and with one of the major payment for ecosystem service being REDD+ and its scientific contradictions. Or think as well about badly designed tree planting schemes, which at some point were climate action number one. So amongst the myriad of schemes and projects and initiatives, very few approaches have been shown to work, particularly at scale. And the explanations are innumerable, but I think that paramount is the refusal of the project designers, the people in charge of these projects, to see the rainforest as a very dynamic and as a very evolving system, which has been shaped and stewarded by people over thousands of years. Instead, these people, these project designers, have often fallen into the trap of regarding the rainforest as some sort of pristine Eden. So if we're looking for successful, scalable and long-term approaches to rainforest conservation, the people of the rainforest are the ones we should have trusted and turned to from day one. And the Cool Earth story is precisely about trust. In fact, I could stop the presentation here, because it is the key ingredient, but it's a bit too intangible. So this story is also about cash, and in a way that's why we're here. Because in 2008, when we were first approached by an indigenous village from the Ashaninka Nation in the central Peruvian Amazon, to help them fend off a group of loggers, regular kind of knock on the door of the village committee. They were coming on a regular basis asking to exploit their resources. They asked for cash, and that's all we had at this time. So we gave them cash because they wanted to stay on their territory and keep their resources. 15 years later, this has seemed to work because the forest is still healthy. Now, just to caveat what you're looking at just now, the low forest loss rates in these partnerships are not a result of the cash that Cool Earth has given them. It's as a result of decades, centuries of cultural beliefs, systems, of production systems, of very complex mechanisms that for many of us are impossible to explain, of a very complex kind of ecosystem of people who have managed to shape these ecosystems, have managed to keep them protected, for lack of a better word. So take this slide with a pinch of salt, but it's just there to show that the forest remains healthy despite the introduction of cash. But most importantly, what's been very interesting to see is that these people have managed not to be excluded from social, economic, and cultural gains, because they were the ones in charge of deciding where to invest that money. What were their priorities? What were their needs at specific times? And that model we used in neighboring villages. We used it in northern Peru as well, in the Amazon with the Awahun nations, and we used it in Papua New Guinea. And it's been amazing to see firsthand. But I think we can do better. Because like most things in life, we were not able to foresee all the challenges that came our way. And we also have to admit to our own ignorance. Like I said earlier, a lot of the decisions about Cool Earth's work were taken by people who lived, thousands of miles away from the rainforest. So in the same way, although to a much lesser extent, that threats to the rainforest continue to marginalize indigenous peoples, Eurocentric ideas failed to create the change that people in the rainforest had been desperately calling for decades. Did we understand clan structure and dynamics in Papua New Guinea? Did we anticipate that regular condition-free cash donations to village committees might lead to elite capture? Did we question our assumption that communities are not as homogeneous as we'd like them to be? Did we design cash projects with potential recipients to anticipate risks and address our assumptions? Did we foresee the bureaucracy imposed by financial, legal, fiscal institutions on aid money in places like Peru? Well, the answer is obviously no, which has meant that over the years, the naive but unconditional cash we gave in 2008 became more and more plagued by restrictions and conditions. But thanks to 15 years of relationship building with rainforest villages, indigenous leaders, and activists across the tropics, listening to their needs, to their priorities, to their visions, discussion with scientists and experts in a range of disciplines, but also recent discoveries such as the Basic Income Earth Network. And we're very sorry it took us so long. We're going back to the way we operated in 2008, but this time we have a plan. Starting in 2023 in the Peruvian Amazon, we will be launching the first basic income pilot of this kind with an indigenous village to assess whether the money enables them to not only remain on their ancestral lands, but also see if it allows them to conceive their own vision of a sustainable and thriving future in the rainforest. We're conscious that cash isn't a silver bullet out of the climate crisis, but it's an incredibly powerful mechanism to support the people who will come up with those silver bullet solutions. So working with independent researchers to evaluate the pilots and ensuring that recipient voices are integral to every step of pre and post pilot design, will extrapolate learnings, insights, data to replicate pilots in other rainforests, such as in the Congo Basin and Papua New Guinea, where we already work. This is obviously something we can't do alone with the few $1 million given by our donors, which is already plenty. We're counting on the results from these pilots to seek new alliances in the climate community and beyond. We're also counting on them to generate greater awareness of the plight of people who live in the rainforest, but also re-establish the flow of climate finance so that it actually reaches the people that need it, free of conditions. As I said at the beginning, we're incredibly grateful to the organisers for giving us such a platform, for giving us the opportunity to introduce ourselves here today. But most importantly, we're here to learn and exchange. I'm not here today, but I know that the expertise in this room is unmistakable, and I cannot wait to be challenged by your knowledge and your experience. So please reach out. We'll be delighted to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
Helpful email address info@coolearth.org. So that one is quite memorable. And I think it's really it's always very helpful to be reminded that people are experts in their own lives and really appreciate that Cool Earth has done that work to reflect and to recognise that recognizing people's agency is quite crucial when developing and designing projects like this. And so now I'm very excited to introduce Frederic, who is here with us in person, who we're going to get to talk to after his presentation. And also noting, I think that Martin just said that we may have Clifford and Ricky online. So if we have questions for the Cool Earth folks, throw them to me. We'll see if they can answer in the chat, and if they can't, we can follow up later with those questions. Okay, so without any further talking from me, Frederic, come on up.
Good afternoon. So I'm Frederic, I'm French. I'm a member of this association. AIRE is an association which has been promoting basic income in France since 1989, so more than 30 years ago. And I joined this association a few years ago. And it happens that 3 years ago I settled in New Caledonia. It's a small territory, just 2 hours flight from here, east. And when I settled there, I wondered, but can basic income be useful for this territory? I was convinced from my role in the association in France, in Europe, that basic income is a fantastic tool. And I raised this question 3 years ago: is it something valid for New Caledonia? And I will try to answer this in the next 15 minutes.
We'll keep an eye on time for you, and I'll give you a time check.
Before talking about the subject, I would like to raise 2 sentences of Thomas Paine in Agrarian Justice. Certainly many of you read this small book written in 1795. And he said, to understand what the state of society ought to be, it's necessary to have some idea of the natural and primitive state of man, such as it is at this day among the Indians of North America. There is not, in that state, any of those spectacles of human misery which poverty and want present to our eyes in all the towns and streets in Europe. Poverty, therefore, is a thing created by that which is called civilized life. And Thomas Paine, very innovative, proposed a solution. Cultivation is at least one of the greatest natural improvements ever made by human invention. It has given to created earth a tenfold value. But the landed monopoly that began with it has produced the greatest evil. It has dispossessed more than half the inhabitants of every nation of the natural inheritance, without providing for them, as ought to have been done, an indemnification for that loss, and has thereby created a species of poverty and wretchedness that did not exist before. And Thomas Paine, probably the first philosopher ever, proposed the idea of creating a basic income as a compensation for the land that is not available for every baby coming to the world. After this introduction with Thomas Paine, I'm coming to my subject, New Caledonia. New Caledonia is a small territory of 270,000 inhabitants, which has been discovered in the 18th century by James Cook and has become French in 1853. It has been a colony of France, and linking with Thomas Paine, I pointed the first Kanak revolt in 1878, which was caused by land spoliation by the French pioneers. After that, of course, in the 20th century, natives became full French citizens in 46 after the Second World War. But, and as you see on the graph, the native Kanaks represent 40% of the population. And you see the Europeans around 30%. And many other communities represent the rest. So the weight of the Kanaks in the global population is huge, not far from 50%. So of course this creates a situation which in the years 84 have come to violence, to what we could call a kind of civil war, because of a strong claim for independence by the Kanaks. And in the last 30 years, it has been peaceful, with an agreement called Accord de Matignon-Nouméa, which has now come to an end. And we are now reaching a point where a status has to be defined for this territory. What level of autonomy? What is the relationship with France? And this is occupying 100% or maybe 200% of the brain of the politicians of New Caledonia. And when I arrived, I tried to look at the problems of this territory. Obviously, always keeping in mind if UBI could help. And I, with a group of people, we identified 10 problems, 10 main problems of the society. A growing juvenile delinquency, a very strong informal economy, inequalities, mostly a resentment of inequalities. Everybody has food, and there is no strong poverty in New Caledonia, but there is a strong resentment. A decline in tribal demography. So many Kanaks are leaving the tribes. A feeling of tax inequity, because following this agreement in the 80s, some tax transfers have been organized throughout the territory which are not well accepted. A culture of easy social allowances, which is not very dynamic. Violences against women, and that's a big issue in this territory. Public finances are in a critical state. No unemployment insurance, and a growing scarcity of fresh water. So what we have at the end of this political period is a very divided society. Unfortunately, the two big communities are not really, they are living together, but it's still very divided. And I'm not seeing a well balance between dues and rights. And that's where also the idea of UBI progressed in our minds. And we wondered how we could, what we could leverage to make this progress. And there are many opportunities also in this territory. We have a strong culture of small entrepreneurs, which we call the patentees. So there are many, and they are used to this life. There is an easy survival with hunting and fishing, and there is this Kanak tribal culture based on exchange. Women are really the basis of the society, and a point of support for any progress, any social progress like UBI. And a main opportunity is that there is autonomy on the tax system. So despite the fact that we are French, we are an autonomous territory, and the tax governance is purely local. So we could implement UBI without asking the permission to Paris. And that's an opportunity. Strong ties to the land, and an urgent need to clean up public finances. So all these conditions, for me, are favorable to the implementation of UBI as a project, as a common project of the different communities together, to have a solidarity project that could unify them more than today. So we designed a local UBI project, which is pretty simple. The amount would be 30,000 francs per adult, a smaller amount for kids, which is a relatively small amount. I don't know in Australian dollars, if somebody can convert.
I can try, yeah.
What is a bit innovative is that the proposal is that the UBI is granted not at 80 years old, 18 years old, but at 14 years old. So between 0 and 14, it is just replacing the family allowances. So it's given to the parents, 20,000 francs per month. But at the age of 14, it's directly on the bank account of the young guy, 14 years old. The society, the community is granting him a significant amount of money, 14 years old. And then at 18 years old, a higher amount. In order to finance this allowance, we calculated that a tax of 12% of all revenues, a flat tax on revenues revenues from labor and revenues from capital, all kinds of revenues, a flat tax of 12% could allow the system to be self-financed. So this is a very simple design, which is a kind of negative individual tax system, because as Ian was showing this morning, so when you have no revenue, you receive the basic income, and then when you have revenue, you have your revenue less the flat tax, so you grow along these curves. So it's a very simple and a very straightforward negative individual tax system. What is important is it's not only a question of money, it's also a question of social contract. Also, the principle of the basic income is that there is no counterpart. We decided that for this project, there should be a kind of, not a bureaucratic counterpart, not a condition, but an expectation from the society as a counterpart. So I am a child, my parents are granted the basic income in New Caledonia, and what the society expects is that my parents put me at school. As simple as this. 14 years old, I'm directly granted the basic income. I'm starting to use the public services. And what the society expects from me is that I have a bank account. I do not practice vandalism, which is one of the problems in the territory, and I don't drink alcohol, which is a major problem in the territory. And for the adults, there is also an expectation of the society that I vote for the elections, that I pay this income tax I've just described at first francs, and that I pay my bills, of course. So it's important that the granting a basic income is not a free lunch. It's also that the society expects a return in terms of how we live together. And we felt it's important in the context of New Caledonia to formalize it in a kind of citizenship contract.
Frederic, if you've got
Yeah.
1 minute, and then we'll do
Yes.
questions and conversation.
Conclusion. This proposal is trying to put a balance between dues and rights. So everybody pays this income tax at the first franc, and everybody is granted this uniform basic income from birth to death. So this is a very balanced system. It is self-financed by design, because if the parliament wants to increase the BI, then it has to increase the flat tax. There's no free lunch. So it is self-financed. It's a freedom income, especially for women, which will have more economic autonomy. It's a dignity income for the poorest, and it's a trust income for the youngsters, which will be granted at an early age, 14, an income by the society. And of course, much less bureaucracy, since the existing tax system can manage it. So we believe it can be a fantastic tool to bring together these two communities in New Caledonia. And my personal objective is that New Caledonia will be the first territory in the world to set up basic income.
Ambitious.
Yes, that's my objective. If you have some money to give me to reach my objective, because I realize it's a lot of work. I didn't present myself, but I have some businesses. I have a company in the aquaculture, and I also have activities in the private sector in renewable energy. So I don't have 100% of my time for this, but nevertheless, it's an objective is to implement basic income in New Caledonia.
Thank you, Frederic. And I think so we've got a little bit of time for questions. I love the massive ambition, being first in the world. And I did check up on Pacific francs, 30,000 would work out to about 370 Australian dollars per month. So hopefully I looked up the right currency. But, it's kind of that base level income, as you were saying. And the challenge being we don't really know what the cost of living is in New Caledonia either. So we do have in this room, just to flag, in about 10 minutes, we've got the panel coming up. So we'll try and keep the time really tight. Before I go to Frederic and call for questions, just a reminder that we think that we have a couple of the folks from Cool Off online. So if you have questions for them, put them to us and we'll pass them on and hopefully get a response. So, question, Elise, excellent. First off the mark.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. I wanted to ask, what is the role of the Kanak in your development of the proposal, and has it been Kanak-led? And I guess I really wanted to understand what actually about the proposal is decolonising, and could it be seen as a process of assimilation, depending on your answer to my first question. And then my last question is the role of France, and should they be paying?
Thank you, Elise.
In fact, since 1988, New Caledonia is in an official process of decolonization, which is scrutinized by the United Nations. So we are in this process. It can be a decolonization through independence, or it can be a decolonization inside France. Both are possible in the United Nations rules. So what we have seen in the last 30 years is that this decolonization process is going on, but not smoothly, because these two communities are still very much against each other. One fighting for staying in France, the other fighting for being independent. And one community has been in the territory for more or less 400 years. The other community has been in the territory for 150 years. And they have to live together in the territory. There is no other option. So there has to be solutions, tools to bring them to live, to run the country together, these two communities. And I believe that UBI, which is by essence a tool of solidarity, which is financed by all and granted to all, either Kanaks, either Europeans, could be a tool to facilitate this process we are in, which is the decolonization process. I forgot the second question.
And I think the second part of the first part of the question was what sort of involvement Kanak people have had in the process, and and it's sort of related to a question I was going to ask, so I'll add that on.
Which is also linked to Cool's presentation and how.
Yeah. Like how, that's right. So my question, so Elise's question, I think, was around, and to Cool Earth as well, the level of involvement and how much of the thinking has been led by kind of people and for people involved in Cool Earth projects. And then my question was about what level of kind of public awareness and support is there overall, and then between those communities as well, as much as you can tell and define that and break it down.
What what you have seen is the result of a working group, which I have led last year. And in the working group, there was one Kanak. It was a small group, we were around 6 people. And then we have designed this system, and now we are promoting it to all stakeholders. Corporate associations, political parties, and Kanaks, everybody. We are trying to convince everybody that this system could be helpful. It's a long way. It's difficult. Sometimes they don't even accept to have a meeting. It depends. To be honest, I mean, the traditional Kanaks, the what we call in English the chef, the tribal chefs and coutumier, yeah. I'm not very optimistic that they will really like it, because it's a revenue for freedom, and many of them want to keep their tribes under their control, and especially when we talk about women, the fact that we can help women to leave their home if there are violences. So it's I mean, I'm not very optimistic that the really old traditional guys will support the system. He's probably a bit too liberal for them. So we are more counting on the younger generations.
Was there any follow-up? Okay, good. Oh, sorry, I'm going to bring the mic so that folks online can hear. And maybe, Jen, do we know if anyone from Cool Earth is able to respond, just in case there aren't?
We can't see them
We can't
on
see
it, but I can
My
type the
question is for
in.
Cool Earth, actually.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm just curious to hear from Cool Earth about are there more details to share about this Amazonian pilot that he was talking about? You know, details like number of recipients, amount of money. Are they thinking like a saturation pilot where like a whole village near or in the rainforest receive it, or would it be like people peppered around the area and so therefore not really a saturation pilot, but just specifically for specific people? And like how far along is this? Like, is this something that they want to do, or is it something where they've started building towards it already, and it's either just started or on the verge of starting? I just want more details.
Excellent. So lots of interest for the project happening in the Amazon from Scott. And hopefully we'll give folks, because if we're going to get a response, hopefully we are. I think hopefully Ricky and Clifford are online, and hopefully they can hear. And if they are, they're going to have to type that response. So did we, in the meantime, while we want to give them a chance to process that question, have any another comment or another question? Mia, I'm going to give it 3 minutes, so Mia, you go, and then we'll hopefully circle back.
Shaved off 5 seconds. So I've just got a question about Fredric's model. We've got quite strong norms around a progressive tax system in our system. It's been eroded, but and it's a site of contestation. But nevertheless, it was held as a norm. Is there a particular reason that you chose to finance this using a flat tax? I'm just interested.
Excellent. And maybe for context, I might have missed it, but is there currently flat or progressive taxation system in New Caledonia? Might help.
Because I have some slides on this, but we take time to show them. But in fact, yes, we analyzed the existing tax system, of course, and today you have 60% of the population which doesn't pay any income tax. And it's a progressive tax system. But the first tranche is a lot of people, they don't pay. And the total amount of money received by the government through the existing income tax is very, very small. The effective rate is 4.5%. Because there are a lot of exceptions, you can reduce your income tax if you invest in something or something. But at the end, there's a very poor. I forgot the name. The poor performance of the tax system, which is bringing a very small amount of money to the public finances. So at the end, we decided that it was better to propose to eliminate totally the existing income tax, because it's just not working. And using an existing tax, which is this one, which is called the CC, Contribution Calédonienne de Solidarité, which has a very low rate, around 2%. Said, okay, we move from 2% to 12%, an existing tax system. We, of course, do the netting of existing allowances, which are become not necessary with the BI, obviously. So we have made all this calculation, we have netted all this, and we have then calculated that with the increase from 2% to 12% of this existing tax, we can finance the system. So the flat tax combined with the basic income, it's a new style of progressivity. Which personally I consider very efficient, very transparent, very simple, and it's important that everybody pays taxes, even the small people with small wages. They contribute to the system. They pay their 12% of their small salary, but everybody contributes, and I believe it's important. So this progressive tax system, which we all know, which we have in France, and with many people excluded from the system, and I personally prefer basic income plus flat tax. I think it's more straightforward, more understandable, and at the end better.
Thank you, Frederic. It is 4:30 on the dot, so we are about to have a plenary session in here, so unfortunately we don't have time for a lot more questions and conversation. Jen, did we happen to see any activity from folks online?
No, we didn't.
Okay, so we'll have to connect Scott with Cool Earth to see if we can
give you
follow up that conversation. So thank you again to everyone for coming along and for the excellent questions, and for your presentation, Frederic, and to the folks who I have had to prepare a video presentation for a conference and it nearly broke me. I hate doing it ahead of time, so huge props to the people who managed to actually do that. Thank you all, and I don't know who's facilitating next, so I guess I'll just disappear and someone will come up in my place.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Kristin.